There's a moment when a man stops being patient and starts being precise. For Ray, that moment came on a Tuesday morning, standing in his own driveway, watching tire tracks cut fresh grooves through the gravel he'd laid with his own two hands. Again, third time that week. Same car, same entitlement, same silence from everyone who was supposed to care. He'd filed the complaints, he'd knocked on doors, he'd done everything a reasonable man does, and gotten nowhere. But what Karen didn't know was that Ray was done being reasonable. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you love HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Ray Calloway was 63 years old, retired from 22 years of pipe fitting, and the kind of man who measured twice before cutting once. After his wife passed, the family home felt less like shelter and more like a museum, every room holding something he wasn't ready to face. So he downsized, found a quiet corner lot in Maplewood Estates, a tidy little HOA community on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a place where a man could tend his garden, park his truck, and finally exhale. The driveway was the first thing he fixed up. Laid fresh gravel himself over 3 weekends, bordered it with timber beams, staked a small private property sign near the entrance. It was his, fully deeded, clearly marked, his small rectangle of peace. He noticed Diane Holloway the first week. She was hard to miss. HOA president for 6 consecutive years, moving through the neighborhood like she owned every inch of it, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched just low enough to look over them at you. She welcomed Ray with a laminated copy of the community rule book and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He thought nothing of it. Some people just like order. He respected that. What he didn't respect was coming home 3 weeks later to find her silver Lexus parked squarely on his private driveway, blocking his truck, his garage, his evening. No note, no apology, just tire marks pressed into the gravel he'd smoothed by hand. He told himself it was a mistake. First times usually are. It wasn't a mistake. The second time it happened, Ray walked next door and knocked, calmly, politely, the way his father had raised him to handle things. Diane answered in a silk robe, coffee in hand, utterly unbothered, and told him she'd been running late for an HOA board meeting and his driveway had simply been more convenient. She said it the way someone says sorry for the inconvenience after keeping you on hold for 40 minutes. Words shaped like an apology, carrying none of the weight. He let it go. He shouldn't have. By the 4th week, it was happening every few days. Sometimes her Lexus, sometimes a silver SUV belonging to her daughter. Ray started documenting, timestamps, photographs, a handwritten log he kept on the kitchen counter. He submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, received a response 11 days later, a single paragraph informing him that the matter had been reviewed internally and found to present no actionable violation. What the letter didn't mention was that 3 of the 5 board members had been personally appointed by Diane herself. He called the non-emergency police line. An officer came out, walked the driveway, confirmed the signage was clear and the property was deeded, told Ray he could pursue a trespassing complaint, but that without witnessing it in real time, enforcement was nearly impossible. He handed Ray a case number like a consolation prize and drove away. That was when Diane shifted gears. Within 2 weeks of the police visit, Ray received his first HOA fine, $60 for a trash bin left at the curb 4 hours past the designated retrieval window. He'd been at a doctor's appointment. The week after, another fine, this one for a patch of lawn edging deemed non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. He walked that border himself with a tape measure. It was within spec by every margin. Didn't matter. The invoice came anyway. His neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Gerald, had been watching all of it unfold from his porch. Gerald had lived in Maplewood Estates for 11 years and had seen Diane run 3 families out of the neighborhood through exactly this kind of slow, bureaucratic suffocation. He told Ray over a fence one evening, voice low, that once Diane decided she didn't like you, really decided, the fines didn't stop, they multiplied. He said it not to frighten Ray, but to prepare him. Gerald had tried fighting her once, years back, cost him 14 months of headaches and a lawyer's retainer before she finally backed off. Ray listened, nodded, thanked him. Then came the morning that changed everything. Ray was leaving for his weekly VA appointment, early, before 7, when he found his driveway not just occupied, but blocked. Diane's Lexus parked nose in, tight against the garage door, her daughter's SUV angled behind it, cutting off any exit. His truck was trapped. He missed the appointment, rescheduled it, waited 6 weeks for the next available slot, sat with that anger for 6 weeks. He filed a police report. He contacted a property attorney who told him a civil suit was possible, but slow, 18 months minimum, no guarantees. He wrote a letter to the county housing authority. Every door he pushed opened into another hallway. And through all of it, Diane Holloway moved through the neighborhood untouched, smiling at the monthly meetings, waving from her driveway, clipboard in hand, sunglasses low. There is a particular kind of fury that doesn't burn hot. It doesn't shout or break things. It gets quiet. It gets methodical. It starts measuring, planning, and waiting for exactly the right moment. Ray went to the hardware store on a Saturday morning with a list in his pocket and a look in his eye that Gerald, watching from across the street, later described as the calmest he'd ever seen the man. That was the day Ray stopped filing complaints.
Ray spent 2 weekends building it. Nothing illegal, nothing destructive, just engineering. The kind of quiet, deliberate problem-solving that 22 years of pipe fitting had made second nature to him. He installed a heavy-gauge retractable bollard at the driveway entrance, the kind used in commercial lots, flush with the ground when inactive, rising to knee height with a key turn. Permits pulled, installation logged. Fully within property rights, fully within county code. Gerald helped him pour the concrete footing on a Sunday afternoon, and by the time the neighborhood was stirring Monday morning, the driveway looked exactly the same as it always had. Unless you knew where to look. 3 days passed. Then it was a Saturday, the morning of the quarterly HOA meeting, the one Diane hosted in her driveway every season with folding tables and a self-congratulatory slideshow. Half the neighborhood was already outside. Lawn chairs out, coffee in hand, the kind of audience Ray couldn't have arranged if he'd tried. Diane pulled in fast, the way she always did, like a woman who had never once considered that a space might not be available to her. The Lexus rolled onto Ray's gravel without hesitation, without a glance at the entrance. The bollard caught her front bumper with a sound that stopped every conversation on the street. She got out slowly, stared at it, then turned toward Ray's house with an expression that cycled through confusion, indignation, and something approaching panic, because every neighbor within earshot was already watching. She announced loudly that the fixture was a hazard, that it violated community placement guidelines, that she intended to have it removed. Ray stepped out with a folder. Permits, county approval, property survey, every document she would have needed to challenge it, already answered. Then she made the mistake that ended her. Flustered, audience growing, she pointed at the bollard and told the crowd she'd seen the exact same model at a supply yard she used for HOA projects, that she knew for a fact it wasn't properly sourced because she had access to that vendor and Ray never went through her. The street went silent. She had just told an entire neighborhood that she expected access to his private property to go through her. Gerald laughed first. The quarterly meeting happened that morning, just not the way Diane had planned it. 3 neighbors filed formal complaints with the county housing authority by the following week, each one citing a pattern of targeted fines and procedural misconduct. Gerald, it turned out, had kept his own records, 11 years of documented irregularities he'd never had the right moment to submit. That moment had arrived. 6 weeks later, a county review found that 14 fines issued over the past 2 years, 7 of them to Ray, had no documentable basis in community bylaws. Diane Holloway was removed from the HOA presidency by a board vote of 4-1. The one dissenting vote was her own. She still lives in Maplewood Estates, still waves from her driveway, but the clipboard is gone. The sunglasses stay up now. Ray replanted the gravel border that spring, sanded and restained the timber beams. The bollards stayed, not out of spite, but because it was his property and it worked exactly as intended. Gerald brought him a six-pack the afternoon the county letter arrived. They sat on the tailgate of Ray's truck in the driveway, his driveway, and said very little, the way men do when everything worth saying has already been handled. Ray had no regrets. He hadn't broken a single rule. He'd simply stopped pretending that patience was the same thing as powerlessness. How long would you have waited before you did exactly what Ray did? If you enjoyed watching karma work, smash that like button and subscribe. I post new HOA revenge stories every week. Comment below. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this?